Alright folks, so I've been working on my Edsel here. We've been cleaning up underneath the hood here. Still got to get rid of that old brake booster there. Got to get rid of that yet. But been going underneath these wires and under all that stuff and trying to get rid of all the cluster mess and all that, because this is what we're dealing with here. Or did I throw it away? But we got wires like this. These went to the solenoid, and I ended up eliminating one because one actually goes to the ignition coil. It's supposed to give it like it gives it a full 12 volts when you first start it, and then the voltage resistor there is supposed to drop down to 6. This is for a point setup. Now correct me if I'm wrong. And so we don't need that wire, so that eliminates that wire because we got HEI, we got electronic ignition now. And went ahead, this is the hot. We will need this, but we got some issues going on, as you can see, so I just cut it off, and I'm gonna run a whole new wire from the back of the ignition switch there, and just run it a whole new wire to our solenoid here. You want to run it from the solenoid, which is the top post on your ignition switch, and it's not on the side or anything like that. It's on the top post of your ignition switch. You want to run it straight to this one right there. That's what you want. You want to run it straight to that one, and then that way when you turn the key, this will fire up. It'll get it cranking. You don't need this other post right here. This post right here is just like for points ignition. We did away with that, so we don't need that anymore. We just need a hot straight to here and ignition switch, which we already have, and that'll take care of that. But I'm gonna run a whole new wire to it, and because the wire harness on this car is just completely trashed. Pretty much all my vehicles, the wire harness on them are just either gone or they're just butchered up, and you know, we tried to do it right here. So the wire harness on that truck used to be beautiful. It was a perfect wire harness. I mean, it wasn't cut nowhere on it, even anywhere under the hood, anywhere on the dash, even the parking lights, the headlights. I mean, that wire harness was 100% original and unbutchered, untouched, and everything until, of course, the fire happened about 2 years ago. But now it's not. But unfortunately, you know, got a little bit of the wire under the hood is messed up, but the rest of the truck is perfectly fine. But of course, we got our old basket case C10 here. The wire harness on this truck is completely trashed. Under the dash, under the hood, everything from the tail lights up has been redone, as I mentioned before. But we're working on that. We're trying to clean up all this wire and basket cases on all my vehicles here and clean it up. But anyway, so I still got to do a few things. Like I said, get rid of this brake booster. I got to swap these lines here. These are actually backwards. This is for the front drum brakes. This is for the rear, and I have these two hard lines backwards, so this one needs to be switched there, and then this one needs to be switched there to correct that. And then of course we need some plug wires yet, and I got to straighten them up because that still looks like a mess. But went ahead and ran a whole new wire loom. I made this up myself. It's not perfect, but I run a whole new wire to the oil pressure warning light down there. I run another one to our temperature warning light, or actually our temperature gauge. And then I went ahead and run a whole new wire from the ignition side of the ignition switch. And I did away with the ballast resistor and all that garbage and just run it straight to the battery side of our ignition coil. So we got a full 12 volts, well 12 and a half. And straight to our ignition coil, because that's what these HEI distributors require. And that takes care of all that mess. That way I got rid of the voltage resistor for the old points ignition, so I did away with all that. And here soon, maybe in another few weeks, might be a little bit longer than that, but I'm gonna order a a electric wiper motor, and we're gonna convert this thing to electric wipers, and I'll get that done. I already went ahead and removed the wiper arms there. I'm gonna get new blades, and I'm gonna get new wiper arms. They are identical to each side, so one of them, if this makes sense here, the driver's side is only the driver's side, the passenger side is only the passenger side. And so keep that in mind. And that's not just an Edsel thing, that's just, you know, to do with like Galaxies, and I think a lot of the Fords of that era were kind of the same. But if you got a driver's side, you got to find the driver's side. If that's what you need a driver's side wiper arm. If you need a passenger side, you need a wiper side. Need a wiper arm for the passenger side. They will not interchange. They are shaped differently. But anyway, so that's what I got on here, and been straight this wire harness out. Got rid of the mirror on the fender there, and that makes it look better. I'm gonna order a set of mirrors and mount them in front of our vent glass there. That'll get that all straightened up, and we're definitely getting there. But enough of me blabbing my mouth here. I'm gonna fire this thing up, and this thing runs a whole lot better now. It's still got a pile of exhaust leaks. I mean, the motor's still worn out, don't get me wrong. It needs to be overhauled, but I mean, it's definitely a noticeable difference. It's a whole lot better. Ignore the exhaust manifolds. I mean, the exhaust manifolds on this motor are garbage. They're cracked, they're good, and anyway, we're gonna do away with that. And I forgot to mention here, this manifold, as far as I know, now I might be wrong until I actually pull the intake manifold off this thing, but this, as far as I could tell, does not have an exhaust crossover underneath this carburetor here. Now that's not the original carburetor, but this is, as far as I know, the original intake, and it does not have the exhaust crossover, which makes it kind of nice. It's kind of a performance gain there. And I'm gonna look at this intake a little bit closer, but it's definitely from this era of car here, because it's got the old road draft tube on the back here, as you can see right there. And that's gonna go too, and we're gonna upgrade this to PCV in time. But I had to go ahead and I had to remove the heater hoses. I got them saved, put them on the shelf. All the original parts I put on the shelf. You know, I'm not just chucking them and all that. I keep everything that comes off this car, unless it's like that brake booster. You know, I'm not worried about that because it's not correct to this car. But anything that's actually correct, the generator, the original point style distributor, the water pump, I got everything to this car, and I put it on a shelf, and you know, I have it in case I ever need it for a reference or anything like that. But I had to unhook the heater hoses there because that heater core is just, I mean, it's not pouring out. It's actually not leaking. But it's steaming the windows up like crazy, so it might be leaking internally. I'm not sure what's going on there, but either way, it's got a leak. I think internally in the core, if that makes sense, something like that. But something's going on with it, so I just bypassed it for now. And it's springtime; we don't need it anyway. But let me fire this thing on up here, let you hear it. Like I said, it's got some piled exhaust leaks, but you know, we're working a little bit on this thing. I'm just trying to straighten it out here so it's more reliable and you know, get this thing a little more cleaned up. But there's our fuel pump there, and that's a little bit of antifreeze that's sitting on the hose there. I actually overfilled the radiator there a little bit, but that's okay. Anyway, let me fire it up here. All right, real quick before I fire this thing up, if you got an Edsel here, this is actually a defect that Ford had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Might even had it in the 40s, but they actually had it really bad on these F-150s here on my 78 here. But it's the same situation with the Edsel here, the Galaxies and all that. If it's automatic, always make sure that you have the car with the you need the parking brake set, and always make sure and verify that this car is in park, because this car does have the safety defect just like this F-150 has. And really the only true way to fix that is to put like a lockout shifter, like a Z-gate shifter. They make that, or either a B&M shifter where you actually got to pull a handle up and it locks it in park. But I actually known that about this car for a while. I didn't really think much of it on this truck. But this truck's been upgraded to a newer steering column. It's got a 79 steering column, so this truck no longer has that defect. So that is actually a recall that the Ford had in the 70s. It was very popular then, but it actually went as far back as like the 50s. But my C10 actually has teeth. I made a video on this, but it actually has the teeth on the steering column here. So when you put it in park, it locks it in park. And there it is right here. The shifting indent there. You can see it way down in there, right there. So it locks it in park. So there's no way it can ever come out. But anyway, keep that in mind. So always verify that this car, if you got a car like this, because you know you don't want to mess your ride up. You love, you know, your ride and all. Always make sure it's in park before you fire it up at any time, and don't play around with that. So we got it in park, because what will happen here, and I'll demonstrate this, I already kind of have in the past, but look, I'm gonna barely bump in here. I'm not even pulling it towards me or anything, But watch this. See? I mean, I barely push down. See, that's what happens. So you got to be very careful about that. See, look, it's sitting in drive right now. So always be careful about that. Make sure it's in park. Look, I'll demonstrate that again here. Just barely push it. I'm not pulling it towards me or anything. I'm just going to push it down. See? So you got to be really careful about that. It's really bad when the column is kind of worn out. This column actually is pretty tight. And it's actually not in the column. It's just the shifting defect. It does not have teeth down there to truly lock it in park, I guess you would say. Always make sure it's in park, just like I did. And we'll go and fire it up. Always do that. If you got a buddy with you, it's a good idea to get somebody just to sit in the car. And, you know, just in case something happened, they can hurry up and hit the brake and it don't take off on you. But, you know, I'm being dead serious about that. It's a safety defect. And like I said, it went back as far as the 50s. It wasn't just these 70s trucks. Anyway, let's fire it up and I'll let you hear here. Alright folks, so I got her fired up here, and you can still hear the exhaust leaks, of course. But this thing sounds so much smoother and so much better. I mean, the car needs exhaust, obviously. But got a new fuel pump on, and I'll just kind of let you hear a little bit. We got some more work to do to it here, and it's definitely a lot better than what it was. Car's not completely warmed up yet, so kind of ignore that. I have the factory original temperature gauge working, and we are going to install aftermarket gauges. And because I already got an aftermarket radio, we're going to put aftermarket gauges and put the radio over in the glove box so you don't see it. And I hate when gauges are hanging down off the bottom of the dash on, you know, this particular car. I can't stand that. It drives me nuts. So we're going to put all that over in the glove box there, and that way we can hide it. And you know, basically you open your glove box up. I want it set up so that, there we go, there's 2022 here. We got a updated radio with Bluetooth and a regular radio, and I actually got the CD player, which nobody even plays CDs no more. But anyway, I'm going to put the radiator, and we'll put our temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge, and a fuel gauge, and a everything else, a voltage gauge. We'll put all that good stuff in there, and that'll just make it nicer. But anyway, here, so we got our factory temperature gauge. It does work. Seems like it's reading pretty accurate. You know, it's not completely warmed up. It'll sit about, probably about another, not quite in the middle, about an eighth to the left there. So it'll sit probably, about right in here somewhere. Not in the middle, but almost. But I actually think the gauge reads a little bit higher than what it should. I might actually have the wrong temperature sending unit, but that's okay. But anyway, our oil light is out, so we got that fixed. Go ahead and cut it off here. And we got a bunch of stuff straightened out here. I still got to get this thing where it'll start with the key. So we've got our oil light works and all that. Our generator light does not come on no more. And that is true. You do lose that feature. So anyway, when you go to a one-wire alternator, that you do lose that feature. You can actually buy an aftermarket, I think it's auto wire, something like that. I had to look it up. But you could buy a aftermarket, it's not really a sensor, well, it's like a voltage sensor more or less. and you just install that in your wire in there, and then you run a hot off that, and you could just do away with your pigtail to the original generator light and then just run a new one to it, and that way you can quote unquote keep that feature. But I'm not really that picky about it. I mean, I might fix that, but because I want to keep the dash, everything interior and exterior, I want to keep it original, but under the hood I'm not, like I said, I'm not worried about that. But anyway, we turn the key on here, we watch our temperature gauge go up, and just to show y'all that it does work. It takes a second, and it'll go up a little more than that, but the car's not completely warmed up. But anyway, we got little bit by little bit straightened out. I got rid of that stupid starter button down here. Somebody had an old starter button down here, and this bracket down here is actually for the hood latch there. And 59 was the only year. It might have been 60, but 58 didn't. No, I take it back. Yeah, 58, 59, and I think actually 60. Now I think actually all the 60 Edsels, the 58, 59, and 60 Edsels had all this. So basically all the Edsels had the inside hood latch, and then some of your Fords, like your Galaxies, I believe had the inside hood latch, and like your Rancheros did not. It's something like that. I can't quite remember. But anyway, but yeah, we've been straightening this thing up here, and I got to order a few more things here. But I tell you what, that fuel pump, man, that really straightened this thing out big time. We still got to do some more wiring. I got to run hot off the ignition switch straight to our solenoid over there so we can get this thing so we can start off the key and get all that mess straightened out. I got to get a new dipstick tube. I say new, I'm going to try and find an NOS one. But I got to replace that because the ends broke off. That was like that when I bought the car. And I did kind of somewhat straighten this fuel line out. It was bent all crazy. It ain't perfect, but I'm going to get another 5/16 fuel line and rebend that and get it, more professional looking. But that's definitely not professional there. But we're going to straighten that out in time. And now on all your gas fittings and all that down here, your fuel line fittings, this is just the this is just your line that comes from your tank. This car doesn't have a tank yet, but it will. And this is the pressure side, and actually this has got a flare on it, and really theoretically you should not ever have to use any type of sealer on the threads because it's got a flare. And it's actually, I believe, a double flare. This is what it looks like when I had it apart. So you shouldn't ever have to put any type of thread sealer on there at all. But there's where I bypassed the heater hose. I really don't like how that looks, but I didn't want some huge long hose coming out and then be in the way of our fan blades there, because I don't like that. And but anyway, that's kind of where we're getting here, getting it more straightened out and getting there little by little. So yeah, I got to do a few more things yet. I'm going to run a hot wire from our ignition switch to our post here on our solenoid so we could start it with the key like it's supposed to be, because that's the way I bought the car. So I got to correct that still, and I got to go ahead and install this battery cable so we got the correct color coded hot battery cable. So I got to install that yet, and then I got to run another wire from the solenoid straight down to the starter because it is brittle as all get out, and that's nothing but a fire hazard. And actually, matter of fact, we'll go ahead and unhook this battery here, and we don't want a ride catch on fire. But it's something, with old cars and all that, don't play around with that stuff. You don't want to sit there and burn your ride down, and God forbid it be in a garage or something like that, and just thinking something really bad happened. Don't play around with that. Check your wiring, and 9 times out of 10, if it's 60, 70 years old, you need to, honestly, I would just go on and upgrade it. That's just how I feel about it. I want to upgrade to get the modern blade type fuses and get rid of them old junk glass ones, and eliminate fire hazards. And what you want to do too, when you wire in the car and all that, like I said, I'm not no professional, I'm just a shade tree guy, but make sure you run the correct gauge wire to whatever you're running it to. Don't play around with that stuff. It's always better to run a lower gauge wire, like a 10 gauge wire, if you're going to run a 10 gauge from the ignition side of your ignition switch to the coil on this HEI, a 10 gauge is perfectly fine. You just don't want to run like a 14, a 16, or even an 18 gauge, because you don't want to play around with that, and especially with the alternator. That's why I got this really heavy gauge wire down there. It's basically just a battery cable, and I crimped 2 ends on it and run it straight off the alternator straight to our solenoid, because don't play around with that stuff. It's not good to do. It's always better to run, and I guess you would say layman's terms, a thicker wire than it is a thinner wire. And then you got to watch your fuses too. It's kind of the opposite with fuses. It's better to run, just say a 5 amp fuse is going to blow first before a 10 amp. So if you run basically a good thick gauge wire with like a 10 amp fuse or a 20 amp fuse, 10 amps is going to blow before a 20 amp will, and it's just better that way. And this is just examples here. I'm not saying what to run, but it's safer that way, because that way you ain't got to worry about burning your car down. Don't play around with that stuff. Because I've learned that, and I'm not taking credit for it or anything. I learned this from good old Chris Craft on YouTube. I tell you what, he's got some good videos. Really good, excellent videos, and this is nowhere near perfect like what he does. This is just, straightening it up, getting the oil pressure warning light working correctly, getting the temperature gauge, the original one in the dash, working correctly, and run the correct wire. The other thing I want to do too is put out there is don't sit there and run a new wire just like you wired a house. You don't want to sit there and run a wire halfway from this ignition coil, straight back to halfway on the wire harness. If you run a new wire from your ignition coil to right here and stop, and then still got from here all the way to the ignition switch the old wire, and it's a different gauge, to me that's just half-assing it. Do it right. Do it the way I did it. I've run everything straight off the source and come straight on out. Don't play around